Okay, Manolis Kojevinas from Barcelona, from the Barcelona Institute for Global Health, from ICE Global. That, I didn't understand much of what you said, but this was very impressive, also Dr. Gianottis and the other presentations. So my question to you is, how has physics managed to secure this very long-term massive funding for this type of research? For many, all practically other areas of research, you know, I'm in health, we get a lot of money, but we have big projects, but they mostly are bottom-up. Some of them are really big, but we don't have the continuity that is needed for that I see in physics. And so what's different with physics? It's either you get long-term funding, massive, or you don't do any research. Is this the issue, or how have you managed? Because we really need in many other areas of research this type of long-term commitment of massive funding, and we have not managed. So what have you done? And you have managed. You are the only ones who have managed, actually.
I don't know, I mean, who is going to address this. I think that all of us. Yeah.
So maybe physics, in particular particle physics and this kind of, yeah, okay. So my answer would be, I mean, let's say two things. First is that I think it's clear to the governments that these kind of challenges are 20, 30, 40, 50 years challenge. And therefore, the institutions in the councils, they organize, on the countries in the councils, they organize themselves in a way that they prepare themselves already for this kind of time scale. For example, Fabiola will be here, will be telling you that, of course, there is a Cern council where there are international treaties that bound you in maintaining the support. But in other things are not such a treaties, but they are understanding from the countries that this is not a 3 years project, it's actually a 20 years project. Now that's the first part of the answer. The second part would be that part of the investment that the countries are making return as a very big industrial returns. Like, for example, in the case of ET, it's a huge industrial return in terms of civil engineering, vacuum, many of the things. And therefore, in the negotiations, the countries, they understand they will be in the project for many years, also because there are many opportunities for many years for industrial returns. That might be the way I would answer the question.
Yeah, I think that this is a long process. And here, I mean, we have heard of processes that has been successful, but also there are processes that are not, are not end. For instance, I remember this the SSC in US that after, they start doing a very big project and they start to build and was stopped. So, it's a long process with many discussions for many years, and after you must have the support of all the political governments and so on and so on. It's not, it's not an easy task. Yeah, but maybe Fabiola.
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, I agree with Dr. Mario and you just said. So in the case of Cern, well, there is the recognition and awareness of the member state of Cern that doing research in fundamental physics today to understand how matter works, how the universe works, really requires big instruments, not something you can do with a tabletop experiment. So this is quite a big instrument, project with long lead times, as Mario was saying, and so that's the motivation for having a sustained budget. But also, in the case of Cern, there is the commitment of the member state to something that is fundamental research, but also, as I try to explain, is also a system of values in terms of cooperation, in terms of showing how people can work together or should work together. And as Mario was saying, as a huge return to the member states, not only the industrial return, but also in terms of education, in terms of training, in terms of knowledge transfer, etc. So it's a full package of things. It's the success in research. Of course, you have to, in order to continue to ensure this budget, you have to know that the budget is well spent in terms, for instance, of scientific return. Also, there is this whole ensemble of other return that is very important for the member states.
Maybe I would like to. I think your question was very general, and in a global sense, it has been answered. It is different how it is in the global sense and how it is at the Spanish level, of course. I think globally it is the typical thing that it is many times said, I don't remember which economist said that the rich countries make investigation because they want to be rich, and the poor countries, they think that the rich countries make investigations because they are rich. No, it is very clear. If a country wants to progress, it is very clear for them that they have to invest in science and also in technology. And these big projects of physics are very clear examples of development of technology that at the end it will be filtered down to the economy, to the progress of the country in general. This aspect, however, is in some cases clear for the Spanish ministry, and in some cases not so clear. So there are differences.
If I may. My voice is off. Yeah, I can. Okay. No, in the case of space, there is it's not so positive, because the big amount of money I mentioned there is for running. If we talk about the space mission, is for preparing or for doing the spacecraft, the platform. There is some geo return which goes to the country for the industry. But in the case of a mission to Venus or to Jupiter, the countries are responsible for building the instrument and for doing the scientific exploitation. And this cost is not in that money. So this is something that has to come from the country itself and not from the commitment in terms of euros that you provide to the agency. So there is a serious unbalanced situation where we provide the technology, very, very forefront technology, but then at the end, the science is done by other countries. So this has to be solved at whatever level. If someone can hear me and send the message to the government that we cannot be building instruments and missions and facilities for other countries. And that is what is happening in Spain for years. Luckily, this is going to change for space missions in the next few years. The first steps are being given, but still far from reaching the equilibrium, for instance, existing in Germany or France, which are, by the way, countries which have their own space agency, and we don't have it. So the situation is not as positive as for ESFRI or some other. So we are really doing work for other countries.
Thank you. Yeah. Is there any other question? Yeah, over there.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Esteve Corbera from the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. I don't know if my question is right, just before the coffee break. I think probably it's more a question for dinner after a bottle of wine. But actually, it's I think probably the only time when I'm going to have these 4 scientists in front of me who work on issues related to the universe. And some of you showed this graph of, you know, how do you explain the history of the universe? And of course, I have a philosophical question to ask. What do you see at the start of this linear history? I mean, how do you explain the origin of the universe? And I know it's a very difficult question, but as I say, I've never had in front of me 4 scientists like you, so I'm taking advantage of this opportunity. How do you explain the origin of the universe in your research groups and how you talk about it? Thank you.
You want to take? Okay. Let me take this one. I think the question goes more on the metaphysics than the physics. So we have the statement I could make from the point of view of the scientific physics part is that the experimental evidence that we have is that as we go, we have the universe is expanding. We know that it's accelerating expansion. So we do an argument on going back in time and say, well, if it's expanding, then we go back and then basically should start from something with this Big Bang-like, okay? And this is basically all what we can say. Now, the origin of this, I think, is in the metaphysics part, as I would say at the moment. You can think about quantum stuff, but I think we don't have an answer for that. I think the only answer we have is that we observe a universe expansion, we go back in time with the mind, and we think this is the model. This model works. We have a perfect model. This lambda CDM works. So we believe the model is right. We are not so sure what happens in the inflation part, that you saw that it's accelerating at the beginning. And hopefully we learn something with the radiational waves, we will see. But that's what the state of the art, okay? So the question of how the universe originates, I believe, goes into the philosophical, metaphysical, which I will not go into this garden at all.
Yes, so coming back a little bit to the role of the large infrastructures, I would like to have to do a question, possibly Fabiola could start answering, about the role that a place like Cern has in training the scientists of the new generations, and also the role that a place like Cern or other places, I mean, I know better Cern, has in building the national communities. For example, I could say that probably more than half of the researchers at our institute, at IGFAE, have been trained at Cern, including myself. So Mario is here, so I would say that half of IGFAE probably has also been trained at Cern and other places. So I think it's, I would like to know how you will, which words could you put in this process, which is very important both for training the new generations and for building national communities that are strong, and then feedback again the Cern research.
Yeah, maybe I can answer if it's better. Yeah, thank you very much for the very good question. So concerning, first of all, the education, I think I've spoken it in my presentation, really education and training. Usually we use the word training for technical education, so for scientists, engineers, physicists, and computer scientists, and education when it targets the public, high school teachers, students, or school kids. So, and I said that both training and education are really one of our pillars. You have seen that in our convention, this was explicitly mentioned as one of our missions. So, and this has been pursued over the decades, because now Cern is today 67 years old, by Cern, enlarging and expanding enormously the opportunity for both the training of technical personnel and for education. So we have a huge amount of activity that show that we train every year, something like at any moment in time we have 4,800 people that are trained at Cern with specific program for technicians, for postdoc, for doctoral students, for postdoc or for PhD students from the various institutes. But also we have a huge amount of activities for the general public, and now with this new project, the Science Gateway, this is going to be expanded. It's very important, it's absolutely important that we, not only that we pursue the training, the technical training, but also that we communicate, as scientists, that we communicate more and better with society. For me, it's fundamental to, to reduce all this mistrust in science. You see the no-vax, anti-vax, etc. This is mistrust in science. And so it's very important that we scientists really communicate better in the sense of making science more accessible to the layperson, but also showing how science works and what is the scientific method, what is evidence-based assessment, so that science becomes part of the life of every citizen, independently of what they do in their professional life. This for me is very important. With the new project Science Gateway, we are trying to expand this. Concerning the relation with the member states and the community, the national community, thank you so much for asking this question. There is no, no difference between Cern and the national community in the member state. The national community are Cern, they make up Cern, and Cern is the national community. Cern is the lab of the member states. It doesn't sit in Spain or in Italy or in France, it sits sometimes somewhere in Geneva, but it's your lab as much as it's my lab, as much as it's a French lab, etc. So it's the common lab of all the member states. So, and historically, the relations are strong. We work together every day in all activities that go from technological developments to education. For instance, I mentioned again the Science Gateway. The building will be here in Geneva, but the programs will be shared with the member states. The materials will be shared with the events and with the educational activities in the member states. So it's really a very, very strong ecosystem. It's like it's like a planet with several satellites around, and all of them make up the solar system. All of them make up the system in its entirety. There will be no Cern without the member states, and probably there will be, I think, accelerator-based particle physics in the member states will be different. It will be difficult without Cern. And the presence of such a lab, centralized lab of all the member states, is really an asset for particle physics. And I think Mario can comment on it, but I think that other disciplines like astroparticle physics, etc., suffer a bit from the fact that they don't have a strong central lab of all the member states available for their field. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, related to that, I would like to add that if you look back and you go university by university and you say what is the influence of Cern in this university, is essentially, it's not just that we are particle physicists or theoretical physicists, but essentially was the way in which to stay and to go inside the scientific community of the field. And this is not only of particle, but it's just to say we are, staying at Cern and doing, and we are in the international scientific community, and if you like to do science, you must be in the international scientific community. Otherwise, it's no science. It's so clear. And this was, the influence of Cern and was just that, to say to the rest of the physics, but also, I remember, I'm very old, and I studied in the Complutense of Madrid, and told me at the time being, in the 60s, that quantum mechanics was not well established, more or less. And also relativity, something that came from foreigner, but it was not clear. So, and this changed, and the reason that changed was because there was some researchers that came to Madrid University, to Autónoma, Paco Indurain, and to the Valencia, Pedro Pascual, and the Barcelona later, and Autónoma de Barcelona, Ramón Pascual, and Santiago was another person, and so on and so on. And this was the influence, and to be or not to be in the international scientific community. And this was the main influence of Cern.
Yeah, I would like to, if I may, complement a couple of words that Fabiola said. One is a privilege to have Cern. That's the first thing for the community. There's no doubt about it. But let me give a couple of ideas that illustrate this better. The management of a LSC project, which is a multi-billion project, has been a tremendous success. And this really is not an easy thing to do. And now that we jump into other projects, which might be also multi-billion, very much the community is looking at Cern as a reference on how the things should be done. And I know Fabiola knows that we will be seeking Cern help in all kinds of things. So in terms of the typical user learns standards on how the things should be in terms of how you meet with the people, how you document the things, how the things are transparent, how they are reviewed, how they are well driven, how they are well managed. And this is something that you don't realize while you are there until you go a little bit out and you see, oh boy, I was used at such a high standard that I didn't even realize it. So I think this is very important to have Cern, and to have a strong Cern that helps also other communities. Just another example, when we have to run the very precise vacuum test that we have to do for our device in Virgo, we have to ask the help of the Cern vacuum department, because they were the very few that were able to really give the standard we wanted to have to make sure that we were not putting at risk anything in the interferometer. So I think it is very clear that we are very privileged to have this kind of strong organization.
So any other question? So I would like to discuss another point. I'm sorry. They told me that we must end. So, more or less, well, just was one point, one minor point is that what is the official delegation in the large infrastructure? It's okay? It could be improved? I don't know. What do you think?
Sometimes it is not, I would say, not ideally coordinated, in the sense that there is scientific community, there is a ministry that has to take many decisions that are complicated sometimes, and I think we scientists think that there is a gap there, that it is a little bit larger than one would decide, and that's why there are these mismatches sometimes between these two big blocks that in reality should merge a little bit more, is my opinion.
Yeah. Anisha?
Yeah, in the case of the Space Agency, it has been very much industry-oriented, and we as scientists have suffered that for years. Now there is an attempt to change that and to have more academic life in the European Space Agency. But it's certainly that there is an unbalance or mismatch between the idea of this executive board, which is finally deciding the mission which is going to fly, and the final word is by ministers or ministry and the space agencies. Although below those decisions, there are scientific advisory committees where we can have some role, but the final role, the one that giving you the euros to do the science and the technology, is on the ministerial side and the funding agency, whatever is science or technology or space. So I think that it should be, there is a structure for advising, but not for final decision-making bodies related to science. That is not there.
But the final decision has to be taken at the top level.
Top level.
This we cannot avoid.
No. But there is an advisory structure that is respected somehow in the case of the agency. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that we must end. So thank you to all the speakers, and thank you also to Fabiola.